Hi, everybody. Chocolate and Fluffy are both with me tonight to thank all of you for getting this Earthfiles YouTube broadcast to 137,000 subscribers this week. And as I promised, when we get to 150,000, let's all come together with your cats, my cats, in that week's live stream and raise glasses of champagne to each other, watching and cheering from wherever you are around the world. And that night, I would like to stay on the air for at least 2 hours, answering as many questions as I can from you. So spread the word, subscribe, and we'll all celebrate 150,000 together with, here is my dear Fluffy, and here is dear Chocolate. They've been patiently waiting in my arms. I'm going to put them down now, and they can, you'll probably see Chocolate's tail come up in front of the camera at some point. And also, tonight, I have in my hands now, it's a brand new DVD of my documentary, Antarctica, Alien Secrets Beneath the Ice. This DVD format is because a lot of you let me know that you would like to have physical DVDs in addition to Vimeo and Amazon Video on Demand. So the brand new Antarctica DVDs are available right now in my Earthfiles shop. That's at www.earthfiles.com. And on the right-hand side, there is a menu, and it has Earthfiles Shop. Go check it out. And my deep thanks to all of you who have written to tell me how much you appreciate my Antarctica documentary with Spartan 1 and Spartan 2, and that you want me to keep digging into the mysteries under the Antarctic ice. I will. And when I can, I'll share news updates with you here on my Earthfiles YouTube live stream. It is hard to believe that it was only 3.5 months ago that this turbulent, dangerous 2020 New Year began, and that one name would soon come to dominate the world: COVID. It sounds like an evil king, doesn't it? The reign of COVID, which we all must bring to an end. The insidious COVID is not even a life form, but it has specifically targeted human beings and has killed at least 134,286 people worldwide as of 5 p.m. Mountain Time today, April 15th, 2020. That number could be much greater if China has underreported its actual deaths that began at the end of November 2019, as the CIA thinks that it has underreported. Important news about COVID came April 1st with this headline in the New York Times. Quote, "Some coronavirus patients show signs of brain ailments," close quote. Doctors and nurses are reporting patients with neurological symptoms, including confusion, dizziness, bad headaches, not being able to smell or taste, strokes, seizures, and heart attacks. It is possible that COVID can enter the brain tissue through nose and sinus passages and through the central nervous system, in addition to its attacks on the respiratory system. If COVID can enter the brain through the nose, it might be damaging olfactory nerve endings on the way, and that might explain why loss of smell and taste is also now on the medical list of symptoms that can signal the coronavirus has entered the body. Further, if COVID can invade and damage brain tissue, as shown in this MRI scan, where the green arrows are pointing, That could explain why some COVID patients have so much trouble breathing. It could be a brain damage problem first, caused by the coronavirus. Breathing is an automatic and rhythmic act produced by networks of neurons in the part of the human brain called the pons and medulla that are right below the thalamus that showed damage in the previous MRI scan. The pons and medulla neural networks direct muscles that form the walls of the thorax and the abdomen. And it's those muscles that produce pressure gradients that move air into and out of the lungs. If the COVID-19 coronavirus can enter through the nose and central nervous system into the pons and medulla and thalamus regions, a logical consequence could be interference with normal breathing. Now back to the MRI scan with the green arrows pointing to damaged tissue. This woman is in her late 50s. She worked for an airline and tested positive for COVID-19. Her mind was not functioning normally. She was disoriented, confused, and extremely lethargic. She complained of a headache and brain fog. She suddenly could not even remember much about herself except her name. In addition to the MRI, here is another look at her brain on a CT scan. On the March 31st, 2020 journal Radiology, it was reported that, quote, her brain scans showed abnormal swelling and inflammation in several regions with smaller areas where some cells had died, close quote. This means that COVID could invade brain tissue directly, even though normally there is a blood-brain barrier. From the beginning of the pandemic, doctors knew that in some patients, they were fighting cytokine storms that occur when the patient's immune system goes crazy, trying to kill the invading COVID. That chaos in the immune system can open up the blood-brain barrier, and COVID viruses circulating in the blood can enter the brain along with the victim's white blood cells in one huge war. The white blood cells want to kill the virus, but they end up killing all the surrounding neurons in the patient as well. And now this week, the medical journal JAMA Neurology reports that in 214 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 in Wuhan, China, 36% experienced some type of neurological symptom. Quote, in general, the more severe the infection got, the more frequent and intense the neurological complications became, with some experiencing confusion, seizure, and stroke. Some experienced the neurological symptoms alone with no signs of respiratory distress. The JAMA article also points out that, quote, both SARS, discovered in Asia in February 2003, and MERS, discovered in the Middle East in 2012, were epidemics that affected the central nervous system of some patients, triggering life-threatening neurological complications that included strokes, seizures, encephalitis, and meningitis, close quote, as appears to be happening in some COVID patients now. Brain and central nervous system damage from COVID-19 might also explain why a small number of patients released from hospitals have gone home and a day or two later, they collapsed dead from their heart stopping, all part, possibly, of these nervous system intrusions by COVID-19. So now, in April of 2020, doctors are warning that serious symptoms of COVID-19 can include sudden mental confusion, trouble breathing, constant pain or pressure in the chest, and bluish lips or face. These are in addition to the classics that have been described for the last 3 months, having to do with fever and persistent cough and body aches. Now, transitioning from the Earth that we love and hope all is going to evolve out of this terrible age of COVID into something with joy again. Last week, I showed you the beautiful green comet Atlas that was supposed to be as bright as Venus in the sky at night in May, but comet watchers were afraid last week that Atlas was coming apart. Well, on this Monday, April 13th, 2020, this tweet from a Serbian amateur astronomer says, quote, "Disintegrated comet C 2019 Y4 Atlas, imaged on April 10th using a 1.4 meter and f5.1 telescope at an astronomical station in Serbia. 5 fragments or condensations are visible, 60 exposures at 60 seconds each with a red filter," close quote. And below the text on the left is a black and white photo of the breaking up comet, and on the right is a color enhancement. And here is a closer image of the black and white, in which at least 4 of the 5 pieces are pretty clear. And then here is the color enhancement that shows pretty clearly 4 distinct pieces, but the Serbian photographer reports that there are 5. We'll have to see how this continues to evolve, and it will be very interesting to see what it is like in May, when it was supposed to be as bright as Venus, and now breaking up into pieces. Who knows what we're going to see? Well, back on our Earth this week, there have been other strange animal deaths that have occurred in North America. In the first 2 weeks of April this month, in the North Atlantic Ocean waters off Nova Scotia, in Cape Breton's English town, and on the beaches of Sambro and West Pennant near Halifax, hundreds of dead seals have washed up on shores without any explanation. Headlines like this one: "More than 20 dead seals wash up in English town," began in the first week of April. And since then, the Marine Animal Response Society estimates that several hundred dead seals have washed up. Sambro resident Jeffrey Howard told a Canadian broadcasting reporter that his neighbor counted 27 seals along a stretch of beach where the seal bodies were separated about 30 feet from each other. And he asked, what natural occurrence could have caused so many seals to wash up at once? This is mysterious, close quote. No one knows what has happened to the seals, or if it will continue. Necropsies will be done to hopefully determine cause of death, but will necropsies be able to explain why 27 of the hundreds of dead seals were sort of lined up on the Sambro beach 30 feet apart? What force or physical process could do that? The Marine Animal Response Society wants to collect more carcasses. So if any of you in Nova Scotia know about any recent odd deaths of seals, please contact Marine Animal Response Society at area code 866-567-6277. And now, Peggy. I'm hoping that we have people with a lot of questions. I will try to go through as many as I can, and saying this in the context that I hope tonight that all of you are in your house or your apartment or someplace safe in a time when I wanted to share how really complex and weird the attacks of this COVID-19 coronavirus are, and that it is more insidious in many ways than SARS or MERS were, and that the whole idea that we're all going to, for the next year or two, to have to be living somewhat like we are now, getting up to getting a vaccine, that it is the vaccine and vaccinating the whole planet that would be the ultimate answer. So this is a difficult time, but hopefully sharing as much information as honestly as we can, it'll help us all continue to get through it. So Peggy, I'm standing by to learn what's on everybody else's mind here.
Hi, Linda. First, I'd like to thank some super chats we had tonight. So thank you to Moonbird and Kiki Tate, Doreen, Winnie, David, Jennifer, Vilma, Linda, Terry, Miss Cookie VL, and somebody's name I'm going to try here, Mu X Tau K Kuba. I'm so sorry. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And text or email us about the correct pronunciation, and I'll try it.
First, we have a great question. One of the viewers remembers an incredible podcast that you did about UFOs that appeared to look like large manta rays. Have there been any sightings like that recently, and where could she find more information on this?
There have been sketches over the years from more than one person, either in an abduction category or as an observer, who have said that what they saw gave them the impression of a manta ray that you'd see in the ocean or in an aquarium. And I've always interpreted that as actually, you could go all the way back to Kenneth Arnold. And Kenneth Arnold, in June 26th of 1947, was flying near Mount Rainier. And he ended up working with a sketch artist, and they showed what I would say was pretty close. It comes like that, then it comes to points, more than one, which is like a stingray. So I think in a really true sense, you could go back to Kenneth Arnold and have that sort of stingray look all the way there. Now, what about all the evolutionary changes? After the Kenneth Arnold sighting and his talking about how they were moving in the air like this, as he said, if you threw a stone across water and it did that is the way that the 9 craft sort of shaped like a stingray and were moving in the air. And then by the time you get from June to July, it was only June 24th or 26th, Kenneth Arnold, and then July, in the week of the 2nd through the 4th or the 5th, that's when Mac Brazel went to the sheriff in Roswell, said that he had found some very strange, what he thought was a crash of something on his ranch. That set in motion the investigations that we've all heard about for the last 70 years. And for the people that I've talked to who had either firsthand information from being security guards at that site, or were people working in the Pentagon and have later talked to me about what they understood, those also were considered to be, and this was the term that was used, wedge-shaped. Well, wedge-shaped is not what you would think. Wedge, and it's been compared to a piece of pie, that would be more like a long triangle. So right at the very beginning of the whole, we'll call public exposure to UFOs and the idea of another intelligence, in those very first sightings that made newspapers and public, are two very different types. And then as you evolved from 47 on into the early 50s, that's when people were, there was a photograph, it looked like the heel of a shoe. And then there were the round ones like McMinnville in Oregon that had some kind of a tower or cupola thing on a disc, a photograph that has been confirmed by many people as being absolutely real. that the film and the camera at the time, everything held true with those. So in a short period of time, you have several different shapes. And it may be even more amazing is that now it's 2020, and the number of shapes of what people have either photographed, sketched, described in audio can now fill huge posters, maybe 90 or more different patterns. So it's a really good question about the stingray and the stingray type. Where has it come up in the 21st century? And where did it come up in the 20th century after Kenneth Arnold versus all these other patterns? And which type of intelligence is in each of these different types? And at least that's the way the human mind wants to organize it. If it is 3 civilizations and they compete with each other and they have 90 different craft, we humans are never going to understand what all is in front of us until there was some straightforward communication from the advanced intelligences about who they are, where they're from, what they want here, the questions of the ages. So the shapes, I'm fascinated with the shapes. I would like to know who is in which one. So tonight, to this question, if there are people who are listening who fall into that category of having inside information from firsthand experiences, from documents, even from being abducted, and you have any insights about the differences between the stingray type and the wedge-shaped type and the round type and the sphere type and on they go, please email me at earthfiles@earthfiles.com, and I will try to interact with as many of you as I can, and we'll start trying in my live streams going forward on some of the questions. I'm going to try to start also carving time where I can read some of the letters that I have been separating out. So we'll see what more can we learn from tonight about the stingray. Thanks, Peggy. That was a great question.
We have another great question from one of the viewers. They were wondering if you've ever heard or received information about whether any of the advanced beings express emotion, like laughing, crying, dancing, even singing or hugging.
We humans are noisy. We express through vocal cords. But we also have moments where we are sitting quietly as a writer or as a painter or as clergy writing a sermon, and our mind is doing the work. And if you think of both of those, the noisy, boisterous humanity that we all love and know, and then that other part that works hard, it's completely silent, inside of a mind that even sees images as you're writing or painting or doing music. And then think of the different types of beings and all of the testimony of so many people from a military category who say that all of the communications that they know about with the various beings, whether they are tall Nordics, red hairs, reptilians, or the huge menagerie of grays, it's all telepathic. So the idea that any of the testimonies for at least a century and a half that all add up to all of the beings doing telepathy would mean that the idea of them expressing joy or sadness or crying or any of that is not something that I'm aware of. But there is this category. Lots of people in the abduction category have had encounters, whether it is with just light or a being, light shaped like a being, or even a cross, or as an orb. More people than you'd think have had encounters, whether it's in their house or out in their yard or out hiking, with something that is round and glows. And in a few cases, it has been reported that out of those come beings, as if the orb itself is some sort of a transporter, or maybe it's a portal. Maybe we're talking about dimension hops. But in some of these moments where people in the abduction syndrome are with beings that they think actually care about humans, they will say, like about the green praying mantis, this has happened many times. I have this in many transcripts. As scary as the praying mantis looks, I feel it has deep sadness. It's generating to me a sense of deep sadness about us humans, as if it knows a lot about us and what is going to happen, and that somehow it is involved with all of the evolutionary life experiments that have happened on the planet, and it feels sad. If you jump over to Betty Andreas and all of the Andreas, the 6 books that were done by Raymond Fowler, Betty experiences sublime joy with beings that are humanoid, quite pale hair, but they express tremendous joy. She feels tremendous joy. They do all kinds of things with light, tossing light. And when you begin to absorb this huge bell-shaped curve of experiences that humans have had with what appear to be other intelligences, even if we're on a planet where the formal structures of religion, government, politics have never embraced the fact that there are other intelligences, many of them, that interact with this planet and have been for millions of years, we may be sort of a reflection. The human psyche, the human soul, the human body, the human energy may be a reflection of what all these beings express, but they express it in completely nonverbal ways. And that seems to me to be the difference. It isn't like we are the only ones who can raise a glass of champagne and cheer a world that is celebrating something. Okay, what about another question?
A viewer was wondering, they were watching the Antarctica documentary, and the symbols and star maps on the doors. Have you ever seen those symbols on any other artifacts, like maybe in a crop circle, perhaps?
On the doors, Spartan 1 describes the 12-armed, what we would recognize as the 12-armed black sun on every single door that he went through in that huge architecture that he said was divided into 6 sites, each site 62 acres, 9-acre rooms, ceilings 30, 40 feet. Another Navy SEAL says he's been in one of the structures in Antarctica and the ceiling was 80 feet and it didn't have any supports. And he said, how does it float That was the question to me. How does the ceiling float? So the idea that, and give me back the question again, because I'm seeing the ceiling floating. Help me
That's
with.
all right. Yeah, I can recap there. They were wondering the symbols and star maps
Yeah,
on
the
the
symbol.
doors. Have you
Yeah,
ever seen
yeah,
them
yeah, yeah.
in or on other
Yeah.
artifacts or perhaps
Yeah,
crop circles?
I'm thinking about that ceiling, and where I was headed was that the black sun is the 12 armed on all of those doors of all of the spaces. And then some of them had star maps. And Spartan 1 had the impression that each star map was a different, it was dealing with different communication. But there was one triangle that was flat like this, and it had lines that came through this sort of flat profile triangle with dots very specifically placed. And Spartan 1 said that that was in the upper right corner of every one of the big, huge black basalt doors. And when he talked with the scientist that he was there to do the extraction with, the scientists said they weren't sure because it repeated throughout these huge architectures in the upper right part of every door, that maybe it meant start here. That's what he said. Start here, or entrance here, or something along those lines. So in terms of what we would call symbols that have been on this planet for some period of time and may have dense meaning that we haven't been exposed to, that it has something to do with other intelligences, not even from this universe, but might be from another universe. Because Spartan 1 talked about the one star map that is featured in my documentary, that the scientists said that it was an overlay of 3 universes. Those were his words, literally, and that the common denominator to the 3, to the way that the star map was carved on the door, was at the black hole at the center of the Milky Way galaxy. And in the last few months, I've had communication with somebody who is trying to study exactly that kind of information. And it is perhaps going to be another chapter in the evolution of what we're going to learn, is that the way very advanced intelligences in universes where they can move portal to portal, they can move between dimensions, move between timelines, move between universes, that the way that they make maps and what they do and what they signal in those maps to, say, another galaxy is something that we still don't fully understand, but some people are beginning to study this, and apparently this is real. That what Spartan 1 introduced is the idea of 3 universes depicted inside of one of those star maps on the door. And mathematically and in the pattern, any of those advanced intelligences looking at it would get a 3-dimensional relationship to that star map that would tell them exactly the source of those that built this huge architecture in the Antarctic continent. Those are the kinds of pieces that are complex for the current civilization on Earth, but I think it is going to be a huge, huge subject as we go on deeper into the 21st century. So, thank you. Yeah, what more is on people's mind?
A viewer would like to know Do you think some intelligences have come and gone already, moved on because they've had no interest in our planet?
I have no firsthand knowledge of that, but I would say it's probably logical to conclude that there have been a large variety of different intelligences that have visited this 4.6 billion year old solar system. And depending upon their evolution, depending upon their needs, it could be that some visitors come to the Milky Way galaxy and to a solar system like this one in this little arm of the Milky Way galaxy because they have the ability to access what kinds of minerals, what kinds of all sorts of waters in a specific area. And they head to a specific area because they want to mine. Space mining, I think, must be a big deal in all the universes. And they would come for a very pragmatic reason to get X, Y, and Z. Others, as is described by many people in the abduction syndrome about the gray types, is that if we knew the truth, that the grays are largely a mix of artificial intelligence with some kind of progenitor biological origin point that may or may not be on the way out, that it is an existential moment for those progenitors, and that the grays are the extension of a dying civilization that's been described. When you look at the big picture of why would there be three, let's say, blonde Nordics, reptilians, and a menagerie of grays competing, it seems like, around our planet and throughout this solar system, as described by people who have been in military or who have worked in, let's say, the CIA and SA area, or abductees. And the very fact that there seems to be some sort of repeated understanding that the three compete over genetic manipulation on this planet, because genetic harvesting and the creation of different containers is a big, big part of the story on this Earth. That Earth is looked at as a big, wonderful laboratory. 2/3 deep water, a good temperature from its sun. So again, it would be, if you are advanced enough in civilizations to move through, let's say, a galaxy, then you would have a huge, I would assume, a huge need in a lot of directions. The one that is the most confusing to me, and I think to people who have tried to study this in the government, is if there's genetic harvesting in sperm and eggs and manipulation to create human containers on this planet, why? That's one of the biggest mysteries, I think. Okay, what about another?
A viewer wondered, what have you heard about abductees' pets and their reactions to their humans after these encounters? Have they displayed any kind of change towards their owners?
Pets. You know, it doesn't come up very often outside of statements like, my cat never moved. My cat stayed asleep. Or the dog didn't bark. In other words, the opposite of what you would expect. And the implication has been, again without proof, but speculation, that if we are dealing with technologies and advanced civilizations that can literally beam up animals, beam up people, beam up plants, beam up water, everything, then, and that a person will say, I went to bed, I know I went to sleep, and when my eyes opened, I wanted to jump, but I was paralyzed, or some variation on that, meaning that the intelligence that, or intelligences that are interacting with a variety of people around this planet, they have, they can be not one, but many different ones. But one of the common denominators seems to be that they have the ability to shut us off, control us, paralyze us, move us through walls. It's described many times. People say it feels like a bunch of feathers on their skin and they know they're going through a window or a wall. And the very fact that people are conscious and this feeling that they're going through matter means that the advancement of the technologies and the beings have the ability to control the space between atoms and molecules, and that we're talking about control over the molecular level. So I would assume that depending upon why they were going to interact with somebody in their house or the car or a boat or wherever it was, and if there were pets, that it would be the simplest thing for these non-humans to just shut down the animals too, because they don't want, for some reason, there seems to be care and concern about you're coming up to this point on the timeline, they lift people out, they insert them sometimes right back to the same second, or days later, it's all over the map about the insertion point, and that it's important to not have cats and dogs and birds and all sorts of things be involved with whatever they're doing at that exact moment in time, lifting out and putting back in. These are speculations, but the idea of controlling Earth life seems to be simple at some nervous, central nervous system or brain level for Earth life. So that's why I think that for the most part, people don't have a lot of reactions from their pets. So now, what about another one?
We have another viewer who would like to know about a war between the Evens and the Nordics, and if you know anything about the war that you could tell us about.
The war that has been described to me by more than one person who has worked in some official capacity in the United States government in Intel has always been described to me as between three factions. I'm not saying this is undisputed fact. I'm saying this is what has been described to me by more than one and more than one time. It's the same story, that there are tall humanoids with or without hair are some of the descriptions. Remember, Spartan 1 said that the photographs that he was shown of the builders of the huge architectures in Antarctica were very human-looking, bigger heads, and no hair. And the way it's been described to me by other people from government or military or intel sources, they talk about humanoids, and the one that has been the most discussed as the comparison to sort of what the government would say has been working this planet for at least 270 million years, falls into the category of the Anunnaki and the Sumerian, and that the Anunnaki were very tall, 12 feet, maybe 13, 14 feet in some cases. And when you go to any museum that has we'll call it the classic stone with all of the beautiful carvings that are related to the Sumerians, the relationship between, say, the Sun King Shamash. Shamash is here in the carving, and here are people. The humans are very small in comparison to this tall being. And that's in stone, and that's been there with language and with illustrations in stone for 10,000, 12,000, 15,000, 20,000 years, if we knew exactly the beginning. Okay, so humanoids, and in the stone, we'll call them stone illustrations, they often have on some kind of a hat. It may spiral up, and some people who have firsthand knowledge, they say from briefings, is that those Anunnaki Sumerian actually have cone-shaped heads, and that's what those spiraling wraparound headgear are. Well then, I remember once saying to one of these men talking about this, well, what about Egypt? If you jump to Egypt, they aren't portrayed as being hugely tall, but they have on some of those strange, large hats. And I've never had anybody successfully talk to me about if there was some sort of a clash of three types: reptilian, say tall humanoids, whether they're blonde-haired, red-haired, black-haired, or no-haired, and the menagerie of grays, and that those three compete with each other. That why is it that the reptilian types and the Sumerian and Anunnaki types, they have been portrayed also in stone as perhaps being one and the same in some lenses about what it was all about, and that the Middle East has come through the reptilian goals, but that the Anunnaki were some kind of humanoid, but they were both working in the same part of the planet. It's very confusing. And when you go to the grays, they appear, at least in some stones, and I think that they can be found in museums. There aren't many, but that's out public, are in stone, say in an Egyptian carved stone, will have those big black eyes. It's that piece of stone that I used in my documentary with Spartan 1 and 2. When Spartan 1 was talking about, he was told that the extraterrestrial influence on this planet goes back thousands, millions of years. He said that he had been told by the scientists that another scientist, not the one in Antarctica, in another operation in Egypt, that the Sphinx was at least 35,000 years old. And I had mentioned on one of my live streams a few months ago that before he died, John Anthony West, who I knew for a long time, he did remarkable investigative work in Egypt. And he had told me the year before he passed that he and Robert Schoch were becoming convinced that the Sphinx was at least 35,000 years old and maybe older. Well, one of the, I guess, both irony and sort of difficult to understand is that science that is fact-based and you want to depend upon it for always being able to get to the truth, it's evolutionary as well. And that science and the perspective of hard facts also evolves as we get more and more information. And that would apply, as John was saying, that even if current academic scientists and people who study Egypt and the Middle East might reject the notion of a 35,000 or 40,000 year old Sphinx, that our government and people like Robert Schoch and John Anthony West had information that they think would justify saying that the Sphinx is 35,000 to 40,000 years old. Well, let's just say, for the purpose of just exploring this idea, that that's true. What was happening on Earth 40,000 years ago? 40,000 years ago is when Cro-Magnon Homo sapiens sapien was in this crossfade with Neanderthalensis. And Neanderthalensis had been the dominant standing up humanoid primate on our planet for an extremely long time. And it's becoming clear through all the National Geographic, they're always publishing things about how Neanderthal was brighter, did the twisting for ropes and weaving. They found pollen on the graves of Neanderthals, which meant that they put flowers on the graves, which meant that they had mourning, that they had an association perhaps with the soul of the family members. That Neanderthal was, they painted, Neanderthal fished, made jewelry from shells, all things that we can relate to as Cro-Magnon Homo sapiens sapien. And yet 40,000 years ago was the completion of the Neanderthal going extinct and Cro-Magnon Homo sapiens sapien coming in to dominate Earth. But to dominate Earth without world global consensus knowledge that with us, under our feet, under the surface of this planet, in other planets in this solar system, in other solar systems throughout the Milky Way galaxy, are intelligences that have been mixing and matching genes, harvesting metals from our planet for millions and millions and millions of years. Why did those intelligences want the genetic manipulations and the creation of a series of standing up humanoid primates to be always in the dark about them? Why was their relationship to evolving Homo sapiens sapien for humans to get down on their knees to them in the spirit of them being gods, but they weren't gods. They were other intelligences from someplace else in this universe. Why the trickery? Why the forced ignorance on evolving humans? What was the reason that Homo sapiens sapien Cro-Magnon took the place of Neanderthal? I think if we had the answer to that question, we would know a tremendous amount about the conflict where some of these questions always come back to that same question. If there are three civilizations, humanoid, greys, and something reptilian, that are always clashing with each other, whether it's in this solar system, another another galaxy or this one, and they are responsible for the evolution of humanoids on Earth. What do they war with each other about? What is their conflict? And why, in the Garden of Eden, why were the first two standing up humans supposed to have been taught by a serpent in the Garden of Eden? These are questions that I wish the entire world were having open discussions about, and that I have always hoped that I would live long enough to see these kinds of question and answers going on in huge forums on television that would signal that humanity was finally moving out of the darkness of something in an almost abusive way, wanting to keep us always dumb and blind about the truth of other forces and intelligences, power brokers for real, of our planet and us. And who knows, the strange, insidious COVID, look at how it's turned the whole planet upside down in 3.5 months. Maybe the Earth needs to be shaken up. And my prayer would be that as all of us have felt this tremendous, profound connection to the wonderful people who are doctors and nurses and the people that are in the front lines trying to help everybody through this being turned upside down, that humanity, humans, maybe we're seeing each other in a much more positive lens than we have for a long time. And that agape love that should connect us will somehow come out of exactly the opposite, that we have to stay apart in order to survive. What a strange time. But out of all of this, if we keep going, if we just don't push things, maybe we will come out on the other side with a vaccine that will put COVID down, and that humanity will then even be in a better place to continue on Earth, maybe with more respect for each other than we had in the world before COVID. On that note tonight, I'd like to thank you all for being here, for your wonderful questions, and pray. I pray every day that a divine field will help us banish COVID and strengthen all of us so that we can end up on a planet that thrives in balance with nature and hopefully respecting and loving each other more than we did before COVID. Thanks. See you next week.